Okay. Let's just give a few seconds for everyone to join, and then we can get started. We're going to give 1 more minute for everyone to join the webinar using the link. Sometimes there are technical difficulties, and then we will introduce our fantastic panel and get started. Okay. Good morning to our fantastic panel members, Ralph, Patrina, and Rich. Thank you so much again for accepting our invitation and joining this webinar. And good day to everyone who has joined us today in this webinar to talk about unlocking the field medical power using AI-driven insights. Very nice to have you, and very much look forward to an engaging and interactive webinar where we hear best practices from our fantastic panel members. Okay, so let's do a quick round of intros. I will start first, and then I'll hand over to our esteemed panel to also introduce themselves before we get started and dive right into the questions. Okay, fantastic. Good day, everyone. I'm Zeinab Sulaiman. I'm the practice leader here at Sorcero. I lead the Medical Affairs Center of Excellence. I come from 8 to 10 years in global medical affairs operations, where I've led number of different strategic projects, including rolling out medical insight strategy, medical omnichannel, impact measurement for medical affairs, and also internal medical affairs communication. I'm really excited to be here today with you, with our panel members, to talk about the role of AI in unlocking the power of medical affairs in the field, and hearing from our colleagues about best practices, gaps and opportunities in the field of medical affairs and MSLs. With that, I'll hand over to Ralph to also introduce himself. Ralph, over to you.
Thank you, Zainab. Appreciate it. And it's an honor and a privilege today to be on this webinar with my esteemed colleagues. I'm Ralph Rewers. I head the oncology field medical team at Gilead in the U.S. I've been in industry for 30. In fact, this month is my 30-year anniversary within industry, and I've been fortunate to spend my entire time in field medical. So I started as an MSL and took on various responsibilities at various companies, many leadership opportunities within my journey. So very honored to be here today and be able to share some insights and some things that we've done over the past years. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Patrina. Patrina.
Hey, thanks for having me here, everyone. Welcome, everyone. We're really looking forward to sharing our insights. My name is Patrina Pellett. I started in medical affairs about 6 years ago, working on AI and insights, and have done everything, I think, in medical affairs, from medical strategy work to KOL databases. And now I really focus on upskilling and training medical affairs folks to help demonstrate their value. Recently, Rich and I have started a venture around really helping MSLs take ownership of their insights. And from that, I will pass it over to Rich.
Great. Good morning. Good. Well, I guess it's still morning on the East Coast. My name is Richard Swank. Thank you, Patrina. And like Ralph, I've been in the field of medical affairs, and specifically field medical, for a long time, 20-something years, 24 years, I think, is what it works out to. And in addition to leading MSL teams and the MSL department at Amgen, where I retired last year, I have also led other functions in medical information, for example, and some medical capabilities. So it's really a pleasure to be here today to talk about this pretty exciting topic. I have to admit, I'm on a cell phone in a parking lot, And so I'll probably turn my video back off so I don't induce epileptic seizures in, moving the phone around. Anyway, really happy to be here and looking forward to do the discussion. Thanks.
You're on mute, Zeinab.
Apologies. I was just thanking everyone for joining and for your introductions. And I was saying that I'm going to do a quick kind of introduction to the webinar and a disclaimer that this is designed to be a non-promotional webinar, very much focused on exploring and discussing best practices and leveraging and on how to best leverage technology to advance the role of medical affairs in this evolving landscape. We know that medical affairs is becoming increasingly becoming a strategic partner in most pharmaceutical companies. They're responsible for bringing in the voice of customer to inform strategy and to inform pipelines and commercial strategy and cross-functional strategy. And it's really, really important for us to be able to leverage one of our most important assets, which is our MSLs. So today we just want to talk to experts in the industry who you've just heard them introduce themselves. We just want to hear from them on what they think are the gaps, opportunities, and best practices in this field, and how we can better utilize technology, AI, and tools that are now available to us to enhance the role of medical affairs, specifically MSLs. Okay, so with that, we will jump right in and start our discussion. So let's start maybe by thinking about how the role of MSLs in the pharmaceutical industry is changing, and how those changes over the past kind of maybe decade are surfacing themselves. Ralph, can I hand over to you to tell us a little bit about these changes that you're observing and what the new MSL is now mostly responsible for, very briefly in your own words. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So first of all, I'll start with, I think, what is the same very quickly. And what's the same is that we're still charged with scientific exchange, making sure that we get a scientific information to our HCPs that we engage with. We're also very involved in insights collection and data, and collaborating with many people that we work with in the field. So that's the same. What's really evolved is how we do the job. And I think the pandemic is a perfect example of saying how overnight we changed from concentrating on live interactions to using virtual interactions, being able to adjust how we do our jobs. I think also our reach can now, with technology, be expanded. MSL teams have always been, as opposed to our commercial colleagues, always been very small. And so really what's evolved is how do we engage with others? And I think we'll talk about it a little later, and how we engage more with community physicians than the top KOLs. But that's changed as well. And then the biggest thing I think is trying to, where when I was an MSL 30 years ago, we were trying to justify who we are, that we are an important aspect in the industry. That's behind us, I hope. And what we need to do is concentrate on looking at the qualitative, how we impact and move things forward within our team. So just my thoughts.
Thank you, Ralph. That's really helpful. Rich, anything to add to that about the evolving role of MSLs?
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. Nice summary. Just three things from my perspective. The first is the thing that has changed, the three things that have changed the most for me, primarily the first one is paying more attention at the local level rather than just curating the top of the heap, so to speak, from an opinion leader perspective. Really paying attention, despite the fact that our teams are so small, how we can help improve clinical care at the local level. So that's the first one. The second area that I think has changed is we have, to Ralph's point, pivoted away from this kind of defensive posture of trying to show how important we are. And the expectation now is that we actually have leadership and ownership, and really creating another pillar within organizations. So medical affairs has become its own pillar, and with that comes ownership. And then with that also comes the third thing, accountability. So those are the three things I think that have shifted in the last 10 years.
That's
Can
really
I add something on?
Please.
Just to echo what Ralph was saying, from some of the effects of the pandemic, what this has led to is the need to have different skill sets as well. So I think what we're seeing across the industry is the need to really have digital skill sets. So you need to be able to engage virtually and in person. And now also, especially with the rise of Gen AI, MSLs are going to be expected to know more about AI and how to leverage this. So I just wanted to add on, in addition to different types of diverse stakeholders, now MSLs need to have additional skills.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. I think this is a really helpful introduction to generally how things are changing and how extensive the role of MSLs really is now compared to perhaps 10 years ago. So over the course of this webinar, I know we only have a few minutes, 45 minutes together, which is not a very long time for everything that we could discuss. I want to focus on mostly two things. I want to talk about the component of field insight gathering and how bringing back the voice of customer is now being carried out by the MSLs, the challenges, opportunities, and how the use of technology, including AI, is shifting this landscape. And I also want to talk about the process of identifying and developing a strategy for engaging with the right KOLs and HCPs, and really the implementation of scientific journey in the field. So first, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into insights and how that's currently being done, and best practices, gaps, and opportunities. We know that insights from healthcare professionals and kind of key opinion leaders that MSLs currently engage with on a day-to-day basis are really crucial in shaping medical affairs strategy and really ensuring that patients have access to the optimal treatment. However, the process of gathering and analyzing these insights has traditionally been very laborious and manual. And it's finally become kind of an official part of the MSL role to bring back the voice of the customer and collect the insights and really inform medical strategy. It's less of an optional add-on to their job and more of a standard part of the MSL role. So with that in mind, how effective is the insight gathering approach and framework that we're currently providing our MSLs, including the listening priorities that are aligned to medical strategy, the kits and kicks, the key insight themes and key insight questions, and kind of having a clear feedback loop. Rich, do you think medical affairs teams in general have now really embraced a standardized approach to good insight gathering practices? And if so, can you share some of the details of how you see this be well implemented and best practices that you've seen across the industry?
Thank you. I do think that in theory, all teams believe that they embrace such an approach and want to have a structured and organized and yet dynamic approach to delivering insights that matter to the company, that matter to improving patient care. So in terms of an aspirational view, absolutely. Where we are in reality, in my view, being able to see how different companies approach this, we're not there. So there, to tee up a bit about the best practices in this space, for me, the companies that are doing it the best are not reacting in the moment to put out a fire, to turn around some insights on some exploding topic that the senior management wants to hear about. Instead, they focus on the longer term and they cast ahead to think about and ask other functions about what is needed at the field level to deliver, to help inform and pivot on strategy or solve a emerging problem and so forth. So the best companies are having that pivot to tackle these issues proactively, looking ahead and identifying opportunities as early as possible. And they're leveraging technologies to do it, right? So they're, in some cases, they're using a third-party software that lays on top of a CRM. And some companies do have AI approaches to help assimilate this kind of data approach to make it easier. The other thing to highlight, I think, quickly is just that the readout and sharing of those insights across functions is more important than ever. And companies really have a very different approach in doing that. even within a company, there are different approaches in how that is executed. And it really should be something that medical affairs teams embrace and instead of run away from. So yeah, so just some perspectives there. I hope that helps.
No, that's really, really helpful. And, I've always kind of thought about productizing field insights and actually sharing it much more broadly than just within medical affairs with our cross-functional colleagues, with colleagues in development, commercial, obviously in a compliant way, to really help inform strategy, because it's gold, right? What field MSLs collect and the information that they have at their fingertip, which, I remember 5-6 years ago, we used to have this conversation around how do we extract this really important information and data that's in the MSL's head and actually make it available and share it broadly. And to your point, Rich, now there are so many softwares, there's the use of AI that's becoming a lot more established within medical affairs, not quite as established as we like, but it's becoming more established and it's really helping medical affairs teams get there. And, I will come to discussing how we're established and how broadly accepted the use of AI is. But before we get there, I want to also think about, how we're preparing the MSLs to take on this role of collecting and bringing back the voice of the customer and these insights, these really crucial insights that clearly are essential in shaping company strategy. Are MSLs receiving the coaching and the training that they need to be able to do this well? Or is this something that's kind of just expected from MSLs to be able to do as part of their job with minimal training? Patrina, can I open this one up to you to share your perspective, please?
Yeah, thank you. I think similar to what Rich was saying about variations in aspirations, we see the same thing when it comes to training and coaching of the MSLs. We have MSLs that are just onboarded, given some papers to read, and then said, go get insights. Surprisingly, we see a lot of people that don't even have medical strategies in place. Rich and I have been running some LinkedIn polls, and we see that a large percentage of people respond to why they can't gather relevant insights is because they don't even have a medical strategy to help them prioritize. So I think we're seeing the shift from people that don't have any training at all to people and teams that are investing more heavily in this because they know that it's critical, not only in the sense of what is an insight, but really on the soft skills that are required. We're also seeing a little bit of a shift away from kind of traditional big workshop type trainings, because we've seen that this is not having high retention, and we're seeing more of a coaching model. So teams are interested in kind of having ongoing coaching, helping address individual team and individual needs to really help get the skills that they're needed to have effective conversations with HCPs. Ralph, I feel like Ralph wants to add on something to this.
Yeah, I do want to add on. I think one of the things, I saw a few questions in the chat. One thing you have to start with, and it's the very basics, because it's not oftentimes understood very well in organizations, is what is an insight? So let me just do that very briefly. What I tend to see a lot of are observations. Let me give you an example. Dr. So-and-so said this. That's an observation. That's not an insight. An insight needs 3 elements. It needs what the person said, but most importantly, what's the motivation? Why did they say what they said? And so it's an additional question that you have to ask to say, okay, Dr. So-and-so, you think this. Can you tell me why? Tell me a little bit more about what you do. So that's the motivation behind it. And then the final piece is that when we do bring that information forward, how do we make it actionable? So what can we do about it? And if you don't have those 3 elements, you don't have an insight. So I think that's and we've done in many companies. I've done this initial training because everybody says, "Oh, well, let's do insights. Let's do this. But you have to know the root theory behind what is an insight. And then we'll talk a little bit later. But then we need to close a loop and make sure. But we have to work very closely with our in-house strategy team to make sure that we're totally aligned in what we're being asked to do, and then the field executes that, brings that back in, and we start this loop. So that's kind of one of the key elements, I think, that oftentimes is missing, and you have to start with the basics.
I want to dig a little bit deeper there. Rich, did you want to add something?
Just to briefly agree completely with what Ralph has said, and on top of that, there's also a nomenclature problem, because the data that is being entered into a CRM by individual MSLs is often called insights, but so is the curated distilled output at the end of the process that is something that is actionable. That's also called an insight. So Patrina has more to add there.
Yes, definitely something we've seen, and this confusion is something we've seen across many companies, and definitely agree that it still continues to be a challenge. But I want to dig a little bit deeper on kind of how MSLs are being tasked to uncover the why. And I guess kind of also building up from the component of training them and making sure they understand the link to strategy. Rich, how are the medical strategy teams within companies currently collaborating with MSLs to provide them with the guidance that they need on linking strategic priorities to the listening priorities and listening themes and the key insight questions that are being rolled out, and helping MSLs really understand the importance of uncovering the why and you know, the important insights that really shapes the strategy, and how well, and kind of add a second question to that, and how well are they currently providing feedback to the MSLs, that feedback loop that we always talk about? How established is that feedback loop? And what are the best practices that we're seeing in this space? A very long-winded question. I hope you remember all the components.
I'll try. Yeah. Thank you. And really interesting and important questions that you've teed up. And let me just start by saying they're doing it really well generally when it comes to finite focused areas like scientific congress engagement, where everything's arranged, everything is prioritized. The communication on this is what the strategy means for our engagement at this congress. Here are the kits and quicks to get us to where we need to be. It can be lovely, right? But when you back up and look at the strategy for a year, let's say on an annual cycle, that's where it all falls apart. It's presented once, it's a one and done. Everybody, tries to convince themselves that it's just a beautiful approach, but then it's never pulled out and looked at. The strategy just goes on a shelf and is pulled out a year later for the next process. So to your point, the training is a gap, and the way that the strategy is communicated to the MSLs en masse is a gap. We've got recent data just from a simple LinkedIn poll that Patrina and I did over the last couple of weeks that confirms that there's a lack of understanding of how strategy is being communicated, and they don't feel comfortable being trained on the strategy. So it's a real issue that pays more attention to the importance of that strategic insight cycle. That if the output of the insights aren't shared back to the MSLs and with the strategy teams and with cross-functional stakeholders to subsequently inform on and pivot the next strategy, then you're not going to get new insights that mean anything else, right? You're just going to repeat the cycle rather than pivot and look ahead and focus on new things. So training is a problem, and the way that the teams are communicating is a problem. It's not done frequently enough, other than the one-off focused things like the scientific congresses. So I'll get off my soapbox. I think Ralph's got a lot to add there.
Ralph.
Well, just two things quickly. I think one, you have to have an incredibly good, close working relationship with your in-house strategy team. So the in-house strategy team is part of this whole process. So they've got to help the field understand what are the most important aspects that they need to hear about. You're sending tons of people out into the field, but if you don't give them good direction about what needs to be gathered and what they're interested in, it won't work. The other thing, quite honestly, it's a very simple process. If your teams are big enough where you have, let's say, 7 MSLs, you need a manager who coaches to insights. So the manager plays an essential role in having that ability to coach their MSLs to say, you know what you just told me is not really an insight, or can you tell me more about this? And that helps to reinforce. We oftentimes in our companies do training, and then we check off the box and we say, we've just had a great training session. If you don't keep it constant, if you don't keep it top of mind, if you don't continue to communicate insights, it'll fall by the wayside. So I think the other thing to remember is some simple logistics, and that is continue to come back and forth on what you instituted and continue to coach to it.
And this is super helpful. And we've talked about some of these gaps, but I also now want to now that we've established what generally kind of shortfalls and opportunities and good practices in insight gathering for the field looks like, and really the importance of field insights for medical affairs in general, I also want to spend a few minutes talking about the role of technology in helping fulfill some of these gaps, right? Like just the feedback loop alone, that we've heard so many pain points around from MSLs, from field directors, from the strategy teams, that can easily be fixed with a really good workflow. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how AI is being adopted to enhance the effectiveness of field medical affairs. I know that many companies who are still collecting their insights in Excel sheets and very manually analyzing these insights, and there are some companies who are right at the other end of the spectrum and using the latest technology to do this. So this could be a missed opportunity because the 360 view of all the various sources of insights. We've talked about this, Ralph. It's not just the field insights, right? If we could combine field insights with all the other sources of insights that medical affairs has and comes across, including ad boards, the data that comes from MedInfo, the external sources of insights that comes through, medical affairs can then really use that data to tell a very compelling story, using data. So I want to very quickly launch a very quick poll to just understand where companies in general are in their thinking, and how they would rate their organization's current adoption of AI technologies, specifically for field medical insights. So let's give a few seconds for everyone to respond to the poll. And I think the responses that are coming through and the numbers are aligned with our expectation, right? It's not surprising. Most companies are still very much doing things manually. There isn't as much of an AI strategy for medical affairs, or there's very minimal adoption. Only 2% of companies who we have on this webinar with us have significant adoption of AI. So interesting, but not surprising results. Rich, what do you think the role of technology in supporting medical affairs with field medical insights activities is still not being that well established and understood? Where do you think the gaps are?
It's an interesting question and a hard one to answer. I think in my experience, let's cut right through the middle, where most companies have some sort of data lake in place. It may not be a uniform and comprehensive source of data, but at least it's an approach that links an internal data set to a CRM and allows triangulation of the relevance of information that is coming in through somebody who's curating it. And even that, using AI to help pull data from a central storehouse, a data lake, and combine it with CRM data from the MSLs, I think that's probably still in the 30 to 40% range, if we were to do a similar poll. So I think it is compounded by the fact that technology and systems, ISIT kind of things, typically aren't housed within medical affairs groups. They're usually an enterprise group that's spending some time supporting medical affairs groups, and so that means that the work and the money supporting that work gets prioritized by some other stakeholder. So across the industry, I see this as a major gap, is that we don't have enough medical affairs specific staff who are able to handle this kind of work in-house. Instead, they're trained to piggyback on another enterprise approach from another group. And medical affairs typically pays the price for that, and not in a good way. I mean, so I'm sorry, I don't think I answered your question, but I think I started to tee up.
Definitely good insights. I think definitely I'm going to open it up to Ralph and Patrina to share their insights too, and then we're going to run a second poll to see what everyone else thinks. But I agree that generally skill set and talent and budget availability within medical affairs to be able to run and execute these type of projects is known to be one of the challenges. But Ralph, Patrina, what are your thoughts in terms of what the challenges are and how we can help medical affairs embrace AI technologies? for
Ralph,
field.
should I go?
Sure, please do.
Okay.
And I'll add.
So I think some areas that AI can help fill the gap for medical affairs teams in particular are along the lines of what Rich was starting with on combining disparate data sources. So helping teams be able to pull in information from slide decks, PDFs, and other types of things that have traditionally been hard to aggregate into one big data lake. Additionally, AI is starting to be used to help coach MSLs in terms of their insights entry and making sure that it's compliant, or other components like including the why and whatnot. I think Ralph has a great example about using AI to help search for things so that when medical directors are looking for insights, they can just, instead of having to read a gazillion of them, they can just search and then the AI will surface up all the key insights. I think another application that we're seeing, especially with the hype around Gen AI, is the summarization aspect. And there was a question around that, if it can only summarize insights or does it pull out more information? And from what I've seen so far, what people are implementing, it's more of a summarization feature so far. And then in terms of, I swear I only have one more, but I would say one of the biggest gaps across medical affairs teams in general is the mindset and education around what AI can do. So I think getting more information and education around what you can expect will really help medical affairs adopt it more widespread.
Yeah, the
I
only
wanna
thing I'll add to what
But Ralph, please.
Patrina said was, what AI allows you to do is to take a bit of human bias out. We are all biased, no matter how we'd like to not be. We are biased based on our experiences and what happens. So when we go through insights, we often unconsciously have human bias that takes a look and summarizes. What AI can do is take out a bit of that human bias. The other example I'll give is as Patrina had said, is I worked at a company where we averaged about 140,000 insights across the globe. We presented this to the medical directors, and it would be lines and lines and lines of data. What we were able to do with AI is to ask a very specific question, and then that question would be answered and bring in insights from various countries to answer that specific question. So to me, oftentimes, depending on how large or how small your company is, AI will help you to collate that information, be able to get a quicker understanding, and then you can take it from there. So I think that's where AI really has a great advantage.
I think you all have hit the nail on the head in terms of really what AI can do. And now that I've transitioned into an AI company after many years in medical affairs and really working very closely with field teams, hearing their pain points and trying to solve their problems, now I can see the power of AI and what many companies who've really adopted it on the other end of the spectrum are being able to deliver with AI. And to all of your points, summarization, being able to ask very specific questions, being able to have all the data in one place, which sounds very simple, right? Like, if someone said, oh, you can have all your data in one place, it sounds like a very simple feature and functionality. But to your point, Ralph, 140,000 insights in disparate sources where, we have to look in different format of documents and different places to just find an answer to a question can take hours and hours of human beings' time. But just being able to go to one place, ask your strategic questions, and train the organization in the ability to be able to first refer to insights and ask any question they want and really get that first pass information from the AI technology will just completely change the practice. And we've seen this really well adopted within our medical information teams, right? Like they saw a need, they rolled out the use of AI for medical information. And it's, although there was probably some concerns at first around robots replacing human beings and taking over our jobs, it's worked so well. And of course, there's always a need for medical affairs professionals. It's not going to completely take over medical affairs professionals, but it's making our jobs so much easier. And it's exactly the same for field medical. The technologies and tools that's been developed specifically for field medical has completely changed the game. And it seems like we're on that journey to embrace it. I want to run a quick second poll to again get the broader audience's thoughts on some of these challenges and barriers within the organization before we move on. So a few more seconds to get everyone else to provide their input. You can see that it's a mix of budget constraints, lack of a strategic alignment or leadership support, which goes back to Patrina's point about really not fully understanding what AI can do, and that still being a gap, and a mixture of that and the technical expertise or resources that are needed, which often exist in other parts of pharmaceutical companies, but not always medical affairs. But we see that's something that's also shifting. So any surprises, any comments or thoughts, Ralph, Patrina, Rich, to the poor responses? It says minimal concern about displacement of jobs, which is reassuring, although there's still some concern.
Yeah, it looks like about a fifth of people indicating lack of strategic alignment or leadership support. And that would link also to budget constraints, right? Just because it hasn't been prioritized. So I'm not surprised by that. It again goes to the level of support that medical affairs teams generally have or don't have.
Yeah, no, completely agreed. Okay. I want to move on to the second component of field excellence beyond insights that also really could benefit and be enhanced by the use of AI and technology. And that's the identification and engagement strategy that we see executed in the field where it comes to engaging KOLs and HCPs. Ralph, are MSLs still primarily focused on engaging with the top KOLs? How is that changing compared to what we used to see?
I think it's a great point. Actually, personally, and what I've seen and tried to implement it at many organizations is, if you think about it, top KOLs are still important. They'll always be at the podium. They'll always be doing the research. They'll always be doing that. But in the current environment we're at, where we can get a question answered on our phones in a heartbeat, I do think that is changing. And I think where we need to spend a bit more time, and it's not easy, is in the community. So if you think about it, where are patients treated? And so patients are treated in the community largely. And I use my world in the last 15 years of oncology as an example. Let's take a good example. We know that within what we call the tobacco belt in the US has a lot of patients with lung cancer. Well, should we look at organizations? Should we concentrate in areas in the community where these patients are being treated and put more resources there and maybe less in other areas where that's less of an issue? So I think organizational setups are need to be evolved. The other thing is we also need to be really good at doing a quick answer. So a community doc sees 20 patients a day. They do not have time to sit there and talk about various theoretical issues. So we need to change the way we engage and answer a question, answer it quickly, and then get out and or ask another question. So I think our approach and how we do this is really being needed. So those are things I see, because we need to start to evolve our organizations, even though we're limited numbers, and potentially use some technology ways to answer some questions that we can do very quickly and help physicians who need an answer and how to treat their patients and need it now. So that's, I think, a big change in how we'll have to evolve.
Thank you. I want to build from there and ask Rich to comment on how strategic and data-driven is the approach that medical affairs organizations are adopting in really identifying the right HCPs or KOLs or community physicians that MSLs need to engage with. And I don't just mean kind of getting a KOL mapping report and following that. As we know, that's something that's happened, and we know that most medical teams have access to it, but really combining and mapping that internal and external source of data and developing that 360 view of the HCPs and KOLs to define what's relevant to my therapy area, to my medical affairs strategy, and define who my MSLs should engage with when, using what channel, to Ralph's point, and share what content, and that true personalization. How well is that being executed, and what else can we do in that space?
Yeah, thanks. It's an interesting question and a big problem. I'm seeing real success with a small number of big companies, almost like the result of the first poll that showed 2%. In a similar way, I'm seeing a small number of companies doing an extremely good job of utilizing disparate data sources to tee up, if you will, a suggested discussion topic or flag a need to engage someone who had a question. And so the technology used to do that can be very powerful, and it can suggest who needs to be engaged beyond the kind of stale list of curated, let's say, panel members that MSLs engaged largely year over year. So the need to refresh that panel routinely and add and evaluate new people all the time is more important than ever. And most companies are doing that now, especially with a lens on paying more attention to the local level, at least in the US, but it's also true ex-US, paying more attention to regions. So that I think the application of AI in instances like that can suggest who needs to be contacted or followed up on for very specific reasons that link to a journey, an educational journey that many companies have now embraced as a way to place a framework around how their field medical team should be engaging. So it's being done, but only a small handful, in my opinion, are really doing it really well.
And I want to build on the application of that kind of scientific journey, Rich. And Ralph, I want your thoughts on, now that we know AI can help us with the identification and engagement strategy, and we know that we can use AI to really reveal to the medical affairs team who we should be talking to about what and what topic, what channel. But how well are medical affairs teams applying their scientific journey model on top of what AI can now do to really drive their MSLs to get maximum efficiency? As we said, the MSL teams are much smaller than our commercial counterparts. They always have so much more to do. So I want to talk a little bit about scientific journey and how AI can help us get the most of what MSLs can achieve in the field.
Sure. I think most folks understand scientific journey, and I think that is a good start. It's concentrating on moving the person along a continuum from unaware of the science to aware, to actually putting in clinical practice. If you think about our jobs very simply, our job is to take from when the science is released and when it's truly in clinical practice and shortening that time frame. That's our job. At the end of the day, that is what we aspire to do. But we need to do it in various different ways. One area is just what you said. How do we use segmentation? How do we use personas? How do we engage with the right science at the right time to the right individual? And I think that's the critical element. And I think the most important thing moving forward that we do need to do is look at sentiment. And that is, how are we changing the sentiment on certain scientific topics from maybe a negative case into a very more of an aligned case. So aligning with the science. I'm not talking about sales here. I'm talking about aligning across scientific topics. So I think one of the best ways we can do that is do an external source. Right now, in scientific journeys, we do usually have the MSL do the evaluation, and that's good. And I trust the MSLs. But I actually think if we can get a way that we can look at sentiment from a third-party perspective and move people along a continuum, that's truly the key to our success, because we all want the same thing. We want the current science to be in place in front of people to make the right decisions for the patients. And remember, we serve patients. At the end of the day, that's what we do. And I think if we can use technology to move us along this continuum, we're going to be in really good shape moving forward.
And I want to build on the topic of sentiment a little bit there, because I think it's a really important component that's, to your point, Ralph, is now available to us, right? And in many ways, scientific sentiment analysis and the ability to actually be able to break down sentiment, not just from how it used to be presented, which is sentiment negative, positive, but sentiment with regards to specific themes of safety, efficacy, and what the HCPs are saying, and what that sentiment looks like. It can very well serve as that feedback loop and a measure of impact that we've always been looking for where it comes to field activities, to drive us away from just quantitative metrics to assess the MSLs by, and actually look at an impact measure for the success of the scientific journey. Patrina, final question for you. how well are we currently assessing the success of MSL engagements and the scientific journey, and anything beyond sentiments that you have seen as best practice in this space?
I would say that one really great thing about where we are in medical affairs in terms of adding value is that there's a lot more resources and a lot more thought going into it. But if the question is, have we cracked the code? The answer is definitely no. I think we're still on this journey, but in a really good place. I think there's a lot of different unique and innovative ways that we can measure impact, like you mentioned, from sentiment analysis and how that changes over time. With AI, you can do that in the scientific realm as well as the digital realm, which is really nice complement to what your MSLs are saying. I think moving into understanding the strength of a relationship is a really interesting way to help measure impact. That's all that's coming to the top of my head right now.
Yeah, I mean, once data is available, and now that we can see how AI can help bring the data sources together. Patrina, you and I have done some work around this, right? Once data is available, there's so many different ways that medical affairs team can actually slice and dice the data to understand the components of what's happening, the activities that are happening, and measure it from a qualitative or quantitative perspective and get closer to impact measurement. So a lot of best practices that we're currently seeing in this space, and a lot more to come. I'm conscious that we're out of time for our kind of regular discussion, although we have another really interesting topic around medical marketing that we're not going to get to. I want to spend the next few minutes looking at some of the questions in the chat and trying to answer some of those questions. Jeff, can you point us towards some of the questions that maybe we can answer, or panel members? Are there any questions?
I've seen there was a theme, and we may have covered it during the course of the time since we started, but there was a desire for individuals to hear examples of how actual examples to help them think through, for example, even what an insight is. And I think Ralph covered that in an earlier discussion, but there was an example of, or a question about how has AI been applied, and we've covered it briefly, but it's been applied in the MedInfo space to really prioritize answering a call and routing it to the right person without having to go through massive amounts of voice response systems when a patient is calling. That's an example in the MedInfo space. In the insight space for MSLs, Ralph talked about the example of how hundreds of thousands of insights data points were put through a generative AI approach to identify what mattered and show the supporting information for it, if I recall. So it is, there's an example there, and I've forgotten what the other question was, but hopefully that gets us started.
No, that's really helpful. And almost all the examples that we discussed today come with a proven use case of how AI can be applied. But just on the kind of last topic of scientific engagement and orchestrating medical engagements, we have really strong use cases of how AI has been and can be applied to help medical affairs teams use data, insights, existing channel mix that they have available to them, and the medical content, and kind of AI being in the middle of it to reach out to the right physicians using the right content, right channel at the right time. So this was kind of almost previously the traditional medical omni-channel question that we know medical has struggled with for many years, but now with the use of AI, we're getting much closer to the successful implementation of mixing field MSLs as a key channel and all the other channels that are available to us to successfully engaging with our HCPs and KOLs. Other questions, panel members, that you thought we should respond to?
Yeah, I think one of the elements, I'll answer a couple of questions were around practicality. I think what we need to do a better job of in medical affairs and in field medical in specific is use data. We need to use data a lot more than we have in the past, and that's where personas come in. That's where channels come in. That's somewhat of the omni-channel approach. Everybody uses the term, but it's hard to implement and execute. But it's knowing what the person needs at the right time and giving them the information that they need in a very succinct manner. I think the days of presentations to large groups and theoretical aspects are largely gone. I think we need to get very specific and understand. I mean, listen, Amazon knows more about me than anybody, right? They know my buying habits. They know everything about me. We need to apply some of those principles within medical so that we can know exactly what the person needs and then scientifically come to them with the answer that they need, sometimes even before they know what they need. And so I think we need to apply some of these principles to be able to continue. Just a quick, and as we had this conversation in the chat around, will this replace field medical? Nothing will replace the human element ever. Can we augment it with all the tools? Absolutely. But the human element, the ability to have scientific exchange is exchange. It goes back and forth. And so that human element will always remain there. So I think I'm not worried about the future of field medical as long as we adapt, as long as we continue to change, as long as we continue to use tools to get us there. But I'm not worried about field medical. I think we'll always have a place with our HCPs that we engage with. And the other thing, lastly, is we also start to need to engage with others. I talked about the community, but there are also many practitioners like APPs, our nurse practitioners, our PAs, our pharmacists. We need to start to engage with many others besides what we currently do with top KOLs.
Completely agree. I think I want to share some specific learnings and examples from how we have seen AI implemented across field medical teams. And Ralph, I know that you have had discussions around this, and from your past experience, you've seen this implemented well as well. So here at Sorcero, obviously, we specialize at supporting medical affairs teams with different aspects of how AI for different components of medical affairs. So I'm just going to put up one slide, and then we can very briefly talk about how we've seen this done well. One of the kind of primary applications of AI that we are seeing from our kind of medical affairs teams and medical affairs colleagues that's coming through at the moment is, like we said during the chat and during the conversation, being able to combine data sources. So field medical data not just being in CRM, KOL profiles not just sitting in our external mapping tool, ad board data sitting in SharePoint somewhere that people can kind of look at once and then it sits there forever, but actually really combining all the data, internal data and external data, and enabling medical affairs team to unlock the power of all of these data sources that they have available to them. And what AI can do is, it's not just a data lake, right? It's not just an example of how the data comes together and it becomes searchable, but AI provides those opportunities for medical enrichment. It allows people and teams and companies to develop the very specific reports and dashboards that tailors to their needs and build workflows, like we were saying, the workflows that really supports medical affairs teams to not just look at field data and what becomes an insight, but also what needs to be an actionable insight and the internal discussions and collaborations that takes place between the countries, the regional teams, and the global teams to define what's actionable and what needs to be actioned. And the examples that we have seen work really well across the different industries from my experience has been supporting with integrated evidence generation planning, supporting with kind of the field engagement strategy, obviously medical insights being a really big one. But Ralph, I also want to welcome and kind of open up to you to share some of your experience from your past lives, your current life around how you've seen AI implemented well, and what's worked well for you, what hasn't. I guess we want to kind of get a bit more granular with examples of AI.
Sure. So, I mentioned earlier about AI will help us to collate and synthesize information so that it's adaptable, so that people can understand it better instead of being overwhelming. The other thing to remember too is that our turnover of scientific information like doubles. I won't get the right number, but it's incredible the amount of data that's now available to people. And I think what we have to do is use this technology in order to be able to synthesize and make this simpler. At the end of the day, we need to convey a simplistic message so that people understand that there's a lot of data about how we do not want to get into the trap of data dumping. People do not retain data that way. So how can we get more specific and utilizing these tools? How can we understand what people need and get that information to them in a very succinct way? And so I think this is where using technology and then looking at the various aspects. I mean, we haven't even touched on HEOR and real world evidence and how that implements and how that can work within there. So I do think that we need to use all of these different tools to our benefit and have it augment and help us do our jobs. There's an incredible amount of information and incredible amount of support that companies can provide us, and I think we just need to gravitate towards this and to begin to use everybody here as providers, supporters to help us get the job done. Specifically, you know, the information about collating stuff, and then also using AI even to craft some different ways of communicating, I think is going to be critically important.
Thank you, Ralph. Rich, anything to add to that based on your experience?
No, I think the examples we covered are high level, but I think they're appropriate. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to allow individual teams to utilize data and AI approaches in a much stronger and fulsome way. I think we're just at the beginning, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. Okay, there's many more questions in the chat, and there's many more kind of general topics that we could discuss, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna open it up for any final questions from, or any final comments from the panel members, or any other questions from our guests before we wrap up. Anything that hasn't been answered will be responded to as part of the post webinar report that we will share with everyone who's registered. But any final comments from our esteemed panelists?
Well,
I'll go first. Oh, no, you go first, Ralph. No, you go.
You're so good.
So I think one of the takeaways is the reason I've stayed for 30 years in this function is that it's always changing, it's always evolving, and I have great confidence. I'm near the end of my career, but many of you on the call are going to continue this process and continue in this function. As long as we continue to adapt to change and use the tools that are available to us, and they're ever changing, as long as we're open to utilizing new things and taking chances and looking at things in a different way, we're going to be just fine. So it's been a privilege and an honor. Thank you for allowing me to spend time with everybody. I'm on LinkedIn. If anybody ever has some questions, send them my way. Happy to do that as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Patrina.
Similar to what Ralph was saying, he always likes to steal my answers. Just about being open and having a growth and continuous learning mindset. I think a lot of these conversations we're seeing around AI is due to a lack of education around it. So think about how you and your team can get educated and upskilled on what is actually possible. Also be open and realize that people are in different spots in this journey and their level of understanding. And just like Ralph, I'm on LinkedIn too. If you have any questions or want to chat, please reach out.
Thanks, Patrina. And last but not least, Rich.
Well, thank you. Just to echo what Ralph and Patrina have said, I'm also on LinkedIn. I think mindset is so important. The skill question and the need to upskill and the need to understand medical strategy and its derivation from corporate strategy, more important than ever. So I'd encourage everybody to have that mindset about where we're going to be in another 10 years. So thanks very much for having me here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you again to all of you for your time and for sharing your expertise. And thank you for all our attendees for listening and joining us. We'll share the report. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.